Yeah, Advok. Yeah, a lot of people talk to me about that video because it kind of gives you, as the title suggests, warts and all. So it helps you with some pitfalls. Let me just turn the volume down on that. There we go. Morning, Adam. I see it's aspiring pipe maker's morning, is it? So, some of you might have seen my video. Well, actually, you wouldn't have seen the video because I'm literally uploading it now as we speak. Oh, I can see the focus is a bit off. Hang on. Right, see, the problem is I'm going to have to turn you around. Let's see if that works better. There we are. The sound might be a bit more muffled because the microphone is now facing that way. But I shall speak with greater gusto. I'm actually just uploading my video now. I posted a picture yesterday of an exploded stem, which was actually quite worrying at the time. Afterwards I realized that I should really consider wear face protection. I used to, right in the early days, I used to wear face protection, but I guess with time you get more confident around the machinery and you get too comfortable, and like I said in my video this morning, which is uploading right now, you have to respect the machinery. I was likening it to my other work that I do in photography. When I do a wedding, I always said to myself, if a day ever comes that I walk into a wedding feeling comfortable and not apprehensive and not nervous, then it's a time to hang up my camera straps, because you got to respect the job that you're doing, and you got to, more than anything, you got to respect the challenges that job brings and the dangers. So with photography, it's just a huge responsibility. You're recording people's big day. You mess it up, you have really messed up their memories. Well, the visual record of it anyway. And I think when you're working on machinery, you got to respect the machinery. If you're tired or inebriated, stay away from machinery. Got to try and keep concentration. And when the stem exploded yesterday, it brought home to me, first of all, you've got to be aware, got to be safe, but also you've got to focus all the time. You get comfortable because you just do things by rote. You're doing things with muscle memory almost. And I was turning this stem. I had already turned and fitted the silver onto it, and I was just doing a rough shaping of the stem so that you have nice equal sides. It was going to be a tapered, like fishtail stem, a short lovat stem, and I just wanted to shape the taper, and then the rest of it, the saddle, I was going to do on the shaping wheel. And just as I was doing that, I don't know, maybe I dug into it at the wrong angle or something, but the thing exploded, and it was quite frightening, really. Yeah, acrylic. It was acrylic. I mean, ebonite is less likely to do that because it's a rubber, whereas acrylic is a plastic. It's much more brittle. The molecular structure is much more granulated, if you like. So essentially, when you're, plastics have a memory, so essentially it's a bunch of molecules held together. And this particular acrylic is particularly soft. So the idea behind this acrylic is that it has the softness of ebonite, but it has the longevity in terms of not getting oxidized or anything like that. So it has the softness of softness of ebonite, but longevity of acrylic. But because of that, the way it's made up, the molecular, from what I can see, the molecular structure is not as strong. The adhesiveness of that structure is not as strong as ebonite or acrylic. So it doesn't take much to separate it. So when you, for instance, when you're bending those stems, when you bend them, it can get very, very soft. It can actually, when it's soft, it can actually tear. It can actually snap as well. It's basically a softer, from what I can see. I'm no scientist, but to me, it looks to me that at a molecular level, the adhesion is not as strong as, say, with ebonite or acrylic. It's that, I suppose, that's the downside. If there is one, that is the only downside of that material. But I suppose it's because it's made that way that it's actually soft yet durable. I guess that's, each thing has its pros and cons. I would certainly say for you, Adam, for anybody, but certainly a beginning pipe maker, is to wear face protection when you're working on an acrylic of any type. Paracus E2 Cuban cigar. Started this yesterday. Very, very tasty cigar. I do have some eyeglasses somewhere which fit over my glasses. I very rarely wear them. They're just too cumbersome. But I guess, wearing glasses itself is some protection, I suppose. But when you're sort of hovering over a lathe, I suppose it's possible for shards to get underneath the glasses. So for today, I'm going kind of back to basics. This is a classic black-red ebonite Cumberland, and I'm going to do a short saddle for that. So it's got a nice pattern on there. I don't know if you can see this or not. So I'm going to have this really nice pattern on the saddle end, so that when you cut into the saddle, you really get that nice graining. I want to try and salvage that piece of silver. Silver is really expensive these days. I need to try and salvage that. I've got one more piece of silver of that diameter, which I'm going to use today, and then I have to order some more. Hey Steve, or Kathy, whoever you are. Right, so the thing when you're turning ebonite or acrylic or whatever it might be, it's really important that your tool is very, very sharp. I've put a new blade on there yesterday. Another thing, what I would say is when you're turning acrylic, a lot of times, especially if you're buying pen blanks and things like that, it comes in square sections rather than round rods. what I do often is, not always, but often, what I'll do is I'll actually take this the rod, the square section rod, and I will just sand off the corners, because those corners, they catch on the blade, and it's what makes it chip or potentially shatter. So if you just sand off the edges so there's no sharp edges, it'll just make your life a little bit easier. Obviously leave a little bit at the end square so that you grip it in your jaws so that it stays true, but if you keep the rest of it and just, you know, have a reasonable amount in there so that it's solid, and then the rest of it, just sand it on your wheel. Just make it as close to round as you can by hand, and then turn it. So the first thing I want to do is get it round. So at the moment it's not entirely round. The thing is that it might actually be round, but the way it sits in your lathe, you know, the way it sits in the chuck might be, you know, very slightly when you put it in, you know, as soon as you tighten it, it spreads a little bit because of the pressure. So it may not be completely round, this bit in here, but when you turn it here, you will get it round. So once it's done, once you do that, you cannot move it, because you will never achieve that same roundness if you want to reposition it. So whatever you need to do, make sure you plan it so that you're doing this half. I'm doing now the stem, the tenon half. So you want to drill it, you want to drill for the tenon, you want to drill for the smoke hole. Get all of that done before you take it out or move it whilst it's in the chuck, because when you turn it round, that's the round it's going to be. You take it out, you'll never get it exactly in the same place. So then when that's perfectly round, you turn it round, put it back in, but because it's perfectly round, you should get a true center there, even if it wobbles, but that's because you haven't turned this bit yet. And then you drill the buttonhole on this side, and you should meet up with the draft hole, in theory. Alexa, play Classic FM.
Classic FM from Global Player.
Oops, see? Not concentrating. each time you do a narrower pilot bit, so the first bit you do, so you're not wasting the stem, you just do a very slight groove till you fit that right. Each time it doesn't fit, you can then turn the rest of it because it's, you know, it's going to be wider. Just now, the closer you get to the actual diameter of the ring, you have to do it in much smaller increments, because what you have to realize is that because you've got a double side of the diameter, when you take off a little bit, you're actually taking off double, because of you've got to take off the thickness on both edges. So if you take off 0.5 millimeter here, it's actually 1 millimeter. So you've got to do it in small increments as you get nearer and nearer to it, if you want it to be a tight fit. We're almost there.
The overture resulted in the flying conducted well, yes, minutes will be here to move to your task through the event. You can email her via classicfm.com. I dare say there are other means of communication open as well, but those are the main two. And tell them what you would love to hear this afternoon. You will like to do the rest. Meanwhile, we should enjoy this. Here's the orchestra, playing the fourth and final movement, the Beethoven Symphony No. 2.
Just a fraction more. This is the bit where you literally have to do a nanometer each time, because it's too loose, and then you're having to put loads there. Now it's really tight, and I can see that the front bit is okay, it's just the back. So this edge is good because I managed to get it on, but so I've got to be careful not to touch the front edge. So I'm going in at a slight angle, very, very slight. And you're literally just taking off the smallest amount. That's perfect. It fits, but it's still stiff, which is what you want. Just going to clean it up. So then the next thing is you've got that face, the wider bit, the flange, you've got to make sure it's completely square, but without taking off more of the actual diameter of the tenon bit. So just a gentle, light touch. Also, the rings, I've pre-sanded them, put them down on a solid flat surface like the bed of your lathe, and just rub it on a piece of sandpaper in a circular motion. That'll give you a nice flat edge. Alright, that's ready to glue. Another tip, before you glue it, just take a round file and file the inside of the ring, just to increase the adhesion, so the glue's got little crevices, micro crevices to grip onto. That has a lot of views in one day, 6,000 views. Did you put any hashtags on it, or what was the title? That's a lot of views. Interesting. Gotta get rid of dust, because you don't want any dust in that spot there, which will hold the ring slightly away from the edge. I put on a lot more glue than I need to, so that every little gap is filled. It's a bit expensive on the glue, but it's worthwhile. Thankfully, I've never had a pipe returned with a ring coming off, which I have had on other brands, I can tell you that much, more than once. So there's a little leading edge there, so the tenon comes out just beyond the silver, which I will then part off. I will square off that with a chisel once that's dried a little bit. I'll carefully take that off so that I can carry on and make a start on the stummel. It's the beauty of having additional chucks and jaws. It's a worthwhile investment. Or if you're super rich, have an extra lathe or two knocking about the place. So that's the stummel for the lovat.
I don't want to speak over the applause there. That's the fourth and final movement debate of the Symphony Number 2, played by the Orchestre Révolutionnaire et Romantique under John Paul. Fantastic effect. Jill from Dagenham says, "Hi AA, I'm just back from a wonderful week bird watching in Northumberland. Puffins, terns, kittiwakes et al. Sounds like you've been on the farm. My first visit to your beautiful home county won't be my last, and nor should it be, Jill. Beautiful place. Mascagni. What we're going to hear from now is who we're going to hear from now, who wrote Cavaliere Rusticana as an entry for a talent competition for new operatic composers. Can you imagine? They must have been so thrilled when they saw this entry. And because he was unknown, the premiere was to a half-empty theatre in Rome. There were critics present there, and they loved it. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, I was very impressed with what you did, to be honest. At the moment, the plan is to make this rusticated. I haven't decided which form of rustication yet, but I have seen some promising grain on there as well, so I haven't made a final decision yet what this is going to be, but we'll see once I've done a bit of sanding on it. So although I've marked the lines out, I'm always a little bit flexible, and I double check here. So sometimes when I draw it out on the thing, maybe that draft hole is not completely central. I always cut it with a little bit extra, as you can see. There's a little bit of room there outside the line. I don't know if you can see this, maybe I can zoom in a little bit. So you can see here, a little bit of extra wood outside the line. So because I want it to, it's more important for me for it to be central here rather than here, I will use this live center to tell me exactly where the middle is. It's got a fine point on it, and that's good enough. Important to get a really tight grip on the block because you've got a long shank, so there's a lot of counterweight spinning around, which isn't being held. Very important to be tight on. You might want to put screws in there if you want. I don't use the screws anymore. Maybe not advisable, but that shank is probably about 3.5 inches. Let me see. It's 3 inches, but it'll be more because I'll be turning the bowl so that it'll allow more length to the shank, a little bit more, maybe 0.5 centimeter or something like that by the time it's turned. So a good idea as well is when you're doing the rough shaping, before you get down to the final shape, is use your live center, just screw it into the wood a little bit so that it grips. Obviously because of that length, I don't always do it, but when I'm working on a piece like that, look at that grain, then I do use it, and then at least you know your block's not going to go
You're
flying.
listening to Alexander Armstrong on Classic FM.
With
If you can see
Utility
that,
Warehouse,
maybe you can't.
helping you save on energy, broadband, mobile and insurance.
Classic FM.
I'm not going to be able to get down to the final diameter because I need to have the stem available to do that. So I'm just going to do the rough shaping, and then I'll go back to the other chuck. Hopefully the glue's dried enough to allow me to work on it. In doing this kind of work, having a broad tip is very helpful because I only cut about half of it, and the other half I use as a guide on the bit that's already cut. So I'll cut just a bit, But the next piece is going to hit whatever we want to cut, so I can stop, 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 stop. And I'm using the tool as my guide. I don't want to do more than that without my stem.
Well, first we heard the intermezzo from Mascagni's Cabaret was to come. We heard
Square it off.
arranged by Mario's aria. Doesn't repeat. It's not.
So here again, I'm going to take this track off, but you do not move the block because you'll never get it back to the same position and you will never find that round again. You'll have to re-round it, which you don't want to do. So that comes off with the block in situ.
Respectively, Greece and Airways, both from 7 a.m. with a perfect start to what is certainly looking like a very promising couple of summer days. I hope that's the outlook for where you are. Shall we have this? This is Camilleri's Concertino No. 1 for clarinet and strings. Looking forward to this. David Campbell, clarinet.
Let's get rid of any surplus. It will have adhered enough to allow you to do that.
Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra under Julian Clayton, and that was the second movement of Camilleri. His concertina, number 1, clarinet and strings. And that is my cue to vacate the studio. Make space for minutes. That's what the family requests next. Do text her on 68012.com. I shall see you tomorrow from 9 to get the weekend launched. Meanwhile, have a fabulous
Alexander Armstrong on Classic FM.
With Utility Warehouse, helping you save a bundle on your household bills.
Antarctica. You have
Alexa,
to
stop.
experience it.
I haven't as yet made a decision on whether I'm going 9mm or non-9mm at the moment. What do you reckon? The silver ring is absolutely perfect diameter. That's good. Nine mil. Is that because you want to see a 9mm one being made, or because you think I should make 9mm? In principle. I don't make enough non-filtered pipes, that's the truth of the matter. Do you know something? It's interesting you should say that, because yesterday the intention that I had was to make this pipe for myself. I do that many times, but I end up selling it because I need the money. But a lot of the pipes that I make, I'm making it with myself in mind. And I suppose that's how you end up with a style, because it's your style kind of thing. But I actually did have in mind that this pipe would possibly be mine. So maybe you're right, maybe I should go with 9mm. Nice classic lovat, classic ebonite. I've done the mortise, well, this side of the mortise very shallow, so that the saddle is not too long, which means that I'll have to trim down the tenon before I insert it. one of the reasons why I put silver on, because it's a narrow diameter, it just helps to hold it all together. Thinking about it, it might have been better putting it on the briar, really. That would have made more sense, but there's still enough thickness there, which is fine. Sometimes I just do it on the stem, sometimes on the shank. On a narrow shank pipe, it's actually more advisable to do it on the shank, so that it stops it splitting. Yeah, this is it's the first one I ever bought. I've had it for about 5 years. It still does a good job. The brand, it's a German brand, I forget the name now. I did buy a second one afterwards, one of these for smaller diameters, which works very well. It's a German make. You should be able to find it on Axminster Tools. But it's not as sharp as it was right in the beginning, but it's still plenty sharp. As I say, I've had it probably right from the beginning, so it's been going maybe nearly 5 years. So I'm not complaining. File the inside, so you don't want any hairs, any plastic hairs on the inside of the pipe. On the outside is fine, because all that does is it helps wedge it in, but on the inside, always file it. Get rid of those hairs which get onto the edge because you've cut it in the jigsaw rule. So it's completely smooth. Oops. So that's completely smooth on the inside, but on the outside I leave those bits on there because they wedge in really nicely. It helps the grip on the inside. When you're putting your glue on, put your glue on the front end. That way when it goes in, it's pushing it along as it goes in. And unless you want to smother the whole thing, you can do that as well. Fish, that's the one. Alright, so before I take it out, I just want to make sure. No, you see, it's not the first time I'm too hasty. I haven't done the draft hole yet. So you get the bit. It's one of the reasons why I like using these kind of jaws, because it allows me to still measure things, and if you do it in a closed one like this, it's a bit harder, So you have to measure it all in advance, and if you have to if you cut it and adjust it as you're going along, then it's all changed. So like this, I can just do it literally as I'm about to. I can see it's the same size as yesterday, so the marker is in exactly the right spot. So even though I didn't measure it compared to yesterday's, the eye is working well. Always withdraw the drill after a little bit, because all the shavings that it's taken off on the inside are building up, and it's pushing, because you're drilling more, there's more shavings, and it's actually spreading the hole inside because it's forcing up against the walls of the hole. So in actual fact, the diameter is not true anymore. It's wider than you think, which is not a bad thing, but it is when you're shaping the stem and you think it's a certain width. It's actually wider, and then you file through into the hole, and then all your work's done to nothing. So just leave it in there without going forward, just to make sure we've got a nice round clean hole. So what I do is I'm using a tapered bit, as you can see, so that tapers down right down to nothing, and I leave a gap at the end of about 5 mil, so that when I drill through, I then use the side file, the hand file, and it just seems to be the right amount for me. So this is what I was doing yesterday, is that when I put this in, so you can see there's a very slight taper there, it's going out a little bit, and I wanted to follow the line of the taper, and as I was doing that, the thing shattered. Because it's tapered, it also means that when I grip it, I'm not wrecking the silver work. You've got to be careful of that as well. You could end up, see it's already virtually touching there, so I'm not going to push it anymore. And you end up wrecking the silver work. You've got a dent in there, you can't file it out because the silver work's not that thick to start with. Sorry, I'm not what you're saying, Aardvark? Use my tailstock to do what? Do you mean to push the tenon into the hole? Is that what you're talking about? Sorry, I missed that comment. Ah, okay. Yeah, you could do that. Certainly with a regular tenon, that would be fine. But with a 9mm tenon, when you push the tailstock into it, because the 9mm tenon is really thin, you end up spreading the end, and sometimes you can even have very micro splits on the end of the tenon. I prefer not to do that. I've done that on regular tenons, but not on 9mm. It's just too thin to do that. I wouldn't recommend it. It might be fine, but it depends. If you're using the pre-made tenons, then I wouldn't do it. If you're making your own tenons and you've got the tenons have got thick walls, then sure, no problem. But the pre-made tenons are very thin, and you put your tailstock in there, and it's just going to spread it from the force. And even though when you put it in the pipe it's fine, but it just doesn't look nice. It's got, the end is spread out and it looks like it's been mangled. And I can feel that we've gone right through, so we're dead on. Yeah, that's good. There's still a bit of a step there. I could keep going. I'm just trying to keep that taper going. I don't want to risk repeating yesterday's story, but it could do with going down a little bit more. So if I don't regret that. Alright, so it's actually spot on, but there's just a little bit in the middle which I have to just sand off. It's where the two sides meet of where I've turned it, but it's the line is actually spot on. I'll take it out now, I think. So there's the stem. So you've got a little bit of a bit in between there where it met, but you can see the line is precise. That line there is bang on. There's a nice little taper there. It's a steady, subtle taper, which is exactly what I wanted, and hopefully that will work out just fine. Right, we can move on back to the stummel. Helps if you put it in the right way, doesn't it? You do have to be careful because that's with lavats with long shaft pipes. There's a lot of wood hanging out there. You got to just be careful that you don't whack against it or something and just snap it off.
You had cash for Arena?
Yeah.
And Matthew went to school alright?
He wasn't happy, but
I haven't had a phone call yet, I'm surprised.
I told him not to bother for calling.
Do you think it was, I mean, he was awake.
He was tired, for sure was tired, but I
Why
said he had to
wasn't
go
he
to bed
sleeping?
early. I
Why?
don't know. Beautiful. Some nice grain on this pipe. Not sure I'm going to be able to rusticate it. can't rusticate this pipe. It would be a travesty to rusticate it. I don't know if you can see that grain, but it's got some lovely grain. Yeah, I trained myself to work left-handed, and the best thing I ever did, really. Just going to move you guys to the desk. Hold on tight. Bit of a mess here because this desk doubles up as well, triples up and quadruples up. It does too many things on this desk. But anyway, hence bits of pipe paraphernalia everywhere. that was for the stem weld that I broke in, or re-broken, seeing as it's a mistake pipe. Yeah, so the thing is that with lathes, the motor is always on the left hand side, the headstock is always on the left, unless you spin it round. I guess you could do that and you just won't see the controls, although with mine you can because it's a remote control thing. I never actually thought about doing that. But the problem is then it would, I could actually reverse the spinning on this one. My one I can reverse, so I could actually do that, and then I could turn using my right hand. But I've got so used to doing my left hand that it's now second nature. The good thing is that I started using my left hand from day one, so it wasn't something that I had to relearn. When I bought my first lathe, I went to Axminster, which is like a 50-mile drive, and when you buy it, they give you like a hands-on lesson in the shop for up to 3 hours, which was very useful. So there I did it with I did it right-handed, but and in the beginning I did do right-handed because in the garage I had more room. Here I'm much more restricted on space. So this is where we're at. That should be quite a long pipe by the time it's done. And it should have some nice grain. There's a very, very slight forward cant, which is what you want. Always the crucial bit is the shoulders. You know, that's always the hardest part, is getting the shoulders right. You want to keep that shape going down. That is true, gentlemen. It's always harder. You just have to practice. When I watched other people doing it, it looked easy too. It's just about practice, really. Practice, double think everything before you do the next step until you're doing it almost automatically, and even then you make mistakes, but certainly double think every time you change from one step to the next. I still make so many mistakes, and I have to redo stuff because of that. The amount of times I've taken the stem out of the chuck before I've drilled it because I'm always focused on drilling the tenon, and when I've finished doing the tenon, I forget about doing the draft hole. So it's very easy to get stuff. It's about always double checking before you change anything. Before you loosen the chuck, always double check, make sure you've done everything that you want to do with that positioning. Make sure you got some dust extraction, that's important. So that's one of the drawbacks with when you're working with a narrow shank, is that when you drill it straight, I could have re-drilled it and go up a little bit so that there's more briar underneath. But if you have a look at that, imagine when you're drilling on a curve, so that curve is still going slightly below that line. So you've actually not got that much briar. So I'm going to have to leave a little bit of a bump, which is what I do anyway, so to make sure that there's enough briar at the bottom. What you can do is, before you drill, once you've done the shank, you can reposition it, tilt it down a bit so that the drill goes up, which creates more room at the bottom. There's two issues with that. Number one is that because it's a narrow shank, you've got to be really careful not to make it too near to the top of the shank here. You could theoretically make that very thin, it could burn through over there. And number two, when you drill upwards, what you're doing is creating a possibility of juice going down for the smoker, for the guy that buys the pipe, which will in turn ultimately make him smoke it less. And if he keeps on getting juice coming back, he'll just stop smoking the pipe and he'll pass it on to the next person, and he won't buy your pipes again. So I've stopped doing that. I did right at the beginning, I did that because it made sense. Or if a particular pipe, I went so far down that I just had to go up to save the pipe, okay. But it's not a good idea to do it too often, because although I've never had a customer complain of juices flowing back, in a 9mm pipe it's irrelevant anyway, because the filter's going to stop that. But on a normal non-filtered pipe, you would have that problem. I mean, you have that problem even with pipes that are drilled straight. You have that problem because oftentimes you've got the pipe sort of upended a little bit. Most people have the pipe down a bit, but sometimes when juice can come back, the action of sucking will draw in that juice. So I prefer not to re-drill upwards, and I try to keep it level. I just make sure I leave a little bit of a bump underneath the nadir of the bowl. And the trick of doing that in a way where it doesn't look like you don't have a straight line, that is practice. So you will see a little bit of a bump, but not to the extent where it looks like you've got a shank and then a bump like that, because that is not attractive. So essentially what you're doing is you're leaving all of it in the middle there, and then you're sanding up so it looks like the line of the pipe is there, but in actual fact there is a bit of a bump, but it's only right in the middle. And the curvature allows you to make it look like it's a completely straight line, or very close to a straight line. The only drawings I do is the two axes, one there and one there. I see some people doing lines all over the place with angles and everything. I don't see the point of it. You have to square your block, obviously, as near as possible. I mean, it doesn't have to be 100%, but it has to be as near as possible. But there's just two axes that you have to worry about, you know. You can draw it on both sides to make sure that it's square when it's in the chuck, so it's square on both sides. You can do that. But if your block is square, then theoretically you shouldn't have to do that. I've never really adopted any of those modus operandi. You know, I see some people, they have blanks which they so when they're working on a fresh block, they've got these plastic sheets which they cut out the shape of the pipe. They put it on the block, draw the outline, and then cut it. I don't do anything like that. The ultimate shape that I usually make on a pipe will be based on the shape that I want to make, and it's in my mind, it's in my memory, and also the grain. So the grain, if I'm doing a billiard and the grain is slightly better, if I tilt the block that way, then I'll tilt it that way and draw it straight like that, and then cut the block accordingly. So the grain will often dictate how I shape the pipe. But once you've done shapes often enough, then you have your shapes in your mind, and you can just keep doing them. It's only when you're doing a freehand, for instance, so then I wouldn't draw it either, because if it's a freehand, I'll be going sort of, if it's a completely sculptural freehand, then I will be doing that on the fly. That would be a sculpture, that would be a shaping that you're doing on the fly. See how it works. A few years ago I did the calla lily pipe, and that one was just literally done on the fly. I worked off pictures, so I had pictures online on the screen in front of me, and I worked from that, just visually copied it basically. I've always been good at copying stuff, copying images, copying pictures, and being able to draw it. I remember once in school, we were drawing in geography. We were asked to draw a map of the British Isles. And I drew the map. It was to proportion. All the little bits on the edges were all correct. When I brought it into school, the teacher said to me, "You traced this, didn't you?" I said, "No, it's all done freehand." Couldn't believe that I didn't trace it. I've always been able to copy stuff pretty well visually, so, and that's pretty much how I work. And like any pipe maker, when you're starting off, you're copying other people's shapes. If you're doing classics, okay, a billiard is now an accepted shape as a classic shape, but if you're doing apple shapes, you're doing volcanoes, or you're doing whichever shape it might be, a Rhodesian, you're doing shapes that you've seen somewhere. So technically, we all copy other people's work. It's only when you're copying somebody's particular stylized way of doing something, then that might be a considered, just copying somebody else's work. But and oftentimes I will do work which is inspired by other people, but I will never pass it off as my own. I'll always sort of acknowledge where I've been inspired. So, for instance, the fade stain that I do often on a bowl, that inspiration, without a doubt, came from Paul Menard, Paul's Pipes, and I've often credited him with them. I'm not going to credit every single time I do it. I've done hundreds of pipes like that now, but I've made it very, very clear that the inspiration for that was Paul Menard. So you do a lot of drawings. What do you do? Are you an architect? What I would say is that I've always had a symmetrical eye. My eye sees things in symmetry, and so therefore when I do things, I tend to naturally do them in symmetry. So that's why you look at the pipe shapes that I do. I don't do that many asymmetrical pipes, because my mind doesn't work that way. I prefer things to make sense. I prefer them to have balance. It doesn't mean I don't do asymmetrical pipes. I do sometimes, but generally speaking, stuff which is I see in my mind's eye, a shape which I invent in my mind, so to speak. It's not invented. I'm not inventing new shapes, but the way I'll shape a particular pipe in my mind will usually be symmetrical. But when you see some of the greats, some of the pipes that are made by the greatest pipe makers, there is symmetry in the asymmetrical lines of a pipe, and that is very, very hard to do. So you'll see, for instance, the classic asymmetrical pipe is the blowfish. You have a look at those shapes out there. Loads of people do. I thought architectural, yeah. So loads of people do blowfish pipes, and the reason why they do that is because the blowfish is all over the place. Now you can make a blowfish all over the place, it'll look nice, and if you get the grain right, it'll look nice. But you get a blowfish which is asymmetrical but spot on in the lines, there's symmetry in that. And that's something which is very, very hard to do, and only the best pipe makers can do that. And that sounds like a contradiction in terms, asymmetrical symmetry, but I suppose what I mean by symmetry is that there is balance. So if the pipe goes in this direction, then opposite it'll go in the other direction in opposing angles, and the angles will be precise. Look, if something's asymmetrical, then it's obviously not symmetrical, but I assume that asymmetrical, the fact that they're using the word symmetrical in the word asymmetrical seems to me that there is still symmetry there, but it's an opposing symmetry, so it's not square. So you can have, so for instance, if you've got two lines which are opposing, if you do that, so they're not symmetrical in that plane, they're not symmetrical, but they are symmetrical in that they might all be 3 inches high, and the top will line up perfectly with the angles will line up perfectly. They're not parallel, but they can still be symmetrical on certain angles and planes. That's how I understand asymmetrical. I may be wrong in that. I suppose you'd be able to comment on that better than me, as an architect. Well, an architectural drafting major. Right, folks, I'm going to have a bit of a break. Thanks for keeping me company. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen, and I will progress with this pipe a little bit later on. But for now, I'll wish you well. And I will catch you on the next one.